Baroness Jones of Whitchurch.
My Lords, on her behalf and with her permission, I beg leave to ask the question on the order paper in the name of my noble friend, Lady Jones of Whitchurch, while declaring my interests on the register.
My Lords, I declare my own farming interests as set out in the register. Upland farmers have been looking after exceptional landscapes, including national parks, for generations. They're responsible for a distinct farming and cultural heritage and the production of quality food. We will work with farmers to improve animal health, agricultural productivity and the environment, and support enhanced rural connectivity to ensure an economically viable future for this and future generations of upland farmers.
With the vulnerability of terrain sparsity and remoteness, the upland areas need a range of measures underpinned by good delivery systems that keeps farming in a wider rural economy, including forestry and environmental landscape management. As the Noble Lord the Minister's Department considered establishing a specialist high-value unit as a successor to SDA to champion the strategic development with a clear vision for the uplands.
My Lords, we entirely accept as a government that the uplands have a very important connection to us all. They, after all, provide 70% of our water, for instance. They have an enormous environmental benefit. And so, yes, we are looking to see of ways in which, through the environmental land management system, which will be coming through to replace CAP, as to how we can support and encourage the next generations to do this vital work which they do on our behalf.
My Lords, I wonder if my noble friend can confirm the need for the 6,500 upland farmers to continue to receive public financial support, because without that they will not succeed. And some 70 million people visit the uplands each year annually. That sort of payment is essential. And secondly, can I add to that the important role that small and medium-sized enterprises play in those local communities, and without that interaction, those communities will die.
My Lords, my noble friend speaks of the whole uplands economy, and in fact, of course, tourism, which is such an important part of the uplands economy, is based on the agrarian systems which make us all want to visit them. So, yes, the answer is we have said that we will continue direct payments for 2019 and in the same way for 2020. There will be a transition, but also we will be introducing the environmental land management system, and I believe that upland farmers will have a very interesting and productive use of that scheme.
My Lords, my Lords, my Lords, my Lords,
this side, this side.
My Lords, my Lords.
So let them come in.
My Lords, I'm sure we can hear from the noble Lord Cunningham, but it is the turn of the Liberal Democrat.
Well done.
My Lords, upland farmers do, as several peers have acknowledged, make a massive contribution to looking after our hill areas, but the character and communities of these hill areas will depend on upland farmers being more than merely park keepers. And does the Minister recognise that if Brexit were to lead to very high tariffs for lamb exports into Europe and massive imports from new trade deals with New Zealand, it could spell the end for hill livestock farming? And this is a really dangerous situation for the hill areas.
My Lords, it's precisely in my original answer why I mentioned food. I think that the upland farmers provide excellent food for the nation and for abroad, and that is what we're seeking clearly to continue. We want a trade deal, we want a deal, and I'm sure all of your lordships would wish us to secure a deal for the nation, but particularly this is very acute for the upland farmers. And I would say that clearly in my reply also about animal health and productivity, we want to work with the farmers to ensure that we conquer many of the diseases which are a travail for farmers, sheep scab for instance, and all sorts of areas of work that industry, government and farmers can work together.
It has long been established that hill farmers regularly have incomes in the lowest decile of all farm incomes. That hasn't changed over many, many years. It's absolutely essential if we want our uplands to continue to look the way they do, whether it's the Scottish Borders, Northumberland, the Lake District, the Peak District, or elsewhere on upland farms, that these people are given more and better support to ensure that we can go on enjoying the upland countryside, as the noble Minister has recognised we all do.
My Lords, again, if I may say, 53% of England's SSSIs are in uplands. This is a hugely important area for our country, and I agree with the noble Lord, coming from, as he does, an area of great upland cultural tradition, rural tradition, that our objective is to secure that future, because it is of importance to us all that upland farmers still produce food and look after this wonderful landscape.
As the Minister does, that the upland farmers are the best guardians of the uplands, and accepting that there needs to be a reasonable income level, will he accept, therefore, that there has to be a market equivalent to what they have at the moment in exporting largely to the European markets, and secondly, a guarantee of income beyond 2020, because 2020 is only next year?
My Lords, we have actually, as a government, said that we will commit the same sum of money up until the end of this Parliament. Now, no Parliament can bind its successors, but 2022 is when this is the likely end of a Parliament, given the cycle we have. Yeah. But clearly, my Lords, the noble Lord raises an issue which, yes, if we are to keep people on the land, they need to have a viable income, and they also need to live in a contemporary life, which is why I specifically mentioned the work that we're undertaking to improve connectivity in the uplands, where we're not as strong as in other upland areas, in other rural areas, and where we need to commit money, which we are.
My Lords, my Lords, my Lords, my Lords,
Crossbench, crossbench,
my Lords,
crossbench,
my Lords, my Lords, my Lords, would the noble Lord the Minister confirm, as a matter of fact, that remaining in a customs union with the European Union would achieve the objectives which all noble lords asking questions before me and the Minister have agreed must be our objective?
Our objective is that we wish to trade freely with the European Union, the EU 27, our partners in, I hope, will be a very productive and long-term economic arrangement, and that is what I believe we should be aiming for.
My Lord. Baroness Donaghy.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask a question standing in my name on the order paper.
My Lords, 2.55 million households were in fuel poverty in England in 2016. We can measure progress using the total fuel poverty gap, that is, the reduction in bills required for all fuel-poor households to heat their home at a reasonable cost, which has decreased by 25 million since 2010. The best long-term solution to tackle fuel poverty is to improve energy efficiency, which we've made the primary focus of our energy company obligation.
I thank the noble Lord the Minister for his answer. I hope he agrees with me that we haven't cracked this problem yet, and the official figures are the tip of the iceberg. Since I last asked this question, things have become worse, with fuel price hikes, a massive rise in the private rented sector, where fuel poverty is at its worst, and the government target for insulating and upgrading homes 60 to 80 years behind target. What practical steps will the government take to solve this Victorian problem before we get to the 22nd century?
My Lords, we should treat the figures with some caution in that they are based on the income below the poverty line, which are relative figures, and that being the case, there is always the danger that the more what one does, the worse they get, because you can never actually meet that target. But the noble Baroness is right to look at practical measures. I would refer to the energy company obligation, which I referred to, which has delivered 2.4 million energy-saving measures since 2013. I would refer to the warm home discount. I would refer to the various measures we announced recently dealing with the private rented sector, providing extra insulation
for houses and increasing the obligation on landlords to spend more on bringing their houses up to an appropriate level of insulation. And I would refer also to the Price Cap Bill, Price Cap Act of last year, which made various changes, and the work that Ofgem have done in terms of the safeguard tariff, and so on. I could go on.
My lords, my lords, my lords. Why should I say thank you? In the past, when I was a member of the London Electricity Board,
Does my noble friend agree that one simple practical measure would be to make the winter fuel payment taxable? It is paid out by the Department for Social Services anyway, so that would be very easy. And to use the tax collected to increase it so that those who do not pay tax get a higher subsidy, a higher sum. And that would mean it was self-adjusting and with no further expenditure, but at least would make the expenditure on the winter fuel payment go to more those who need it.
I suspect it is a benefit that a large number of members of this House are in receipt of, and I see one or two who indicate they're not. I will note what my noble friend has to say. I think it is a very good suggestion, and I will make sure that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, is made aware of it.
Lords, the Minister is absolutely right to mention the private rented sector. 1 year ago, the minimum energy efficiency standards regulations came into force, which meant that properties could not be rented to on the new tenancies if they didn't have a better EPC than E and above. And yet those properties are still being advertised that are not meeting that criteria. What is the government doing to make sure that local authorities actually apply those regulations and fuel poverty is reduced in that sector?
The noble lord is right. It is a matter for local authorities to do that, but the noble lord will also remember that we brought forward further regulations this year that he and I debated in this House, where we increased the obligation on landlords in terms of how much they should be expected to spend to raise the houses in the private rented sector up above up until at least, I think, band E, but I forget the precise level they have to be at.
My Lords, will the Minister inform the House how many households dependent on universal credit have to choose between sufficient food for their children and sufficient, on the one hand, and sufficient heating to keep the children warm during the winter months? If those figures aren't available, will the Minister commit the Government to commissioning a study to find out that information?
Well, my lords, I will see whether those figures are available, and if they are, I will make them available to the noble Baroness. What I was trying to address in my original answer was the importance of the aggregate fuel poverty gap, and that we are seeing it coming down over the years. The aggregate fuel poverty gap was something of the order of 857 million in 2010. It has now dropped by 25 million to 832.
One of the key aspects to reduce
renewable energy prices become more and more competitive with new technology. Wouldn't one very simple way to ease your fuel poverty be to reduce the subsidy charge on electricity bills that has to be imposed to pay for green subsidies? And also, would he not agree that the energy cap, which Her Majesty's government imposed, hasn't been a great success, since fuel bills actually are rising all round?
On that last point, I can assure my noble friend that we estimate that the price cap will save consumers something of the order of £1 billion on their bills annually. On his first point about setting the levels of subsidy for renewables, it is important to provide the appropriate subsidy to see that we get the appropriate developments in renewable energy. And we have seen, as my noble friend will be aware, a dramatic drop in the price of the cost of producing offshore wind, for example, and the same is true of solar, and we hope those trends will continue.
One of the key aspects to reduce fuel poverty is to give people the tools to manage themselves through the infrastructure development of smart meters. On this development curve, could the Noble Lord the Minister give the House a measure of success regarding how many households have been brought out of fuel poverty by their introduction?
My Lords, the Noble Lord is right to talk to the importance of smart meters. We hope that by 2020 every household will have been offered a smart meter. Most people are satisfied with those, and if used properly, we expect smart meters to enable consumers to take something of the order of £300 million off their fuel bills.
The Lord Bishop of St Albans.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
My Lords, there are several recognised religions in China, with tens of millions practising Christians, Muslims and Buddhists, amongst others. However, we are deeply concerned about developing restrictions on freedom of religion or belief in China, including reports that authorities are tightening control over how certain religions are practiced. At the United Nations Human Rights Council last month, I raised directly concerns about restrictions on freedom of religion or belief in China, including on Muslims and Christians in Xinjiang.
I thank the Noble Lord the Minister for his reply. There are deeply worrying reports coming out of China, not least persecuting the Christian churches there, which is an ancient Christian church which was founded in the 7th century. But would the Noble Lord the Minister particularly comment on the developing situation concerning Uyghur Muslims and the development of the network of re-education camps in Xinjiang province? What representations have Her Majesty's Government made, and what is Her Majesty's Government planning to do?
My Lord, the Right Reverend Prelate is right to raise the issue, the desperate situation facing Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang province. And I assure the Right Reverend Prelate that we've raised this directly on a bilateral basis with the Chinese government. And as I've already indicated in my earlier answer, that I raised the issue directly during the Human Rights Council with specific reference to the Uyghur Muslims during our statement. And indeed, working with like-minded partners, including the United States, we also hosted a side event during the Human Rights Council to draw further attention and increase collaboration internationally on this priority issue.
To have the chance to read yesterday's Spectator and last week's Westminster Hall debate about forced organ harvesting from China's religious minorities, including Falun Gong, Uyghur Muslims, Tibetan Buddhists, and possibly Christian dissidents, along with prisoners of conscience, in which the Fiona Bruce, Member of Parliament, the chair of the Conservative Party's Human Rights Commission, described it as potentially nothing less than a 21st century genocide, describing it as almost a perfect crime because no one survives. My Lords, will the Government attend this week's China Tribunal hearings chaired by Sir Geoffrey Nice QC, who prosecuted Slobodan Milosevic and modelled on the People's Tribunal into the Vietnam War, pioneered by Bertrand Russell and Jean-Paul Sartre, and who in their interim findings say, and I quote, "We are certain unanimously and sure beyond reasonable doubt that in China forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience has been practised for a substantial period of time involving a substantial number of victims." And, my Lords, will the Government ask China for their response to these deeply disturbing findings?
My Lords, I have indeed, I read the debate, not the article which has taken place, but I will certainly do so. On the specific issue that he raises about organ harvesting, he and I, the Noble Lord and I, have talked about this issue on a number of occasions, and I assure him we are watching and working very closely on the outcomes of the Sir Geoffrey Nice review. I know the detailed report is also going to be out later this year, and our officials have been attending every evidence session and will continue to do so in that respect and update accordingly. In terms of raising this issue directly, I, like Noble Lord, am deeply concerned, particularly because there is an issue on organ harvesting not just from people elsewhere, but also, as I was hearing and being briefed on the issue of prisoners, for example, within the system who are also then, it has been suggested, are being used for this purpose. It is a deeply concerning situation, and we are raising it at all levels.
Whether he would also be prepared to raise this issue with the World Health Organization, because their responses to concerns raised about the use of organs in the appalling way the Noble Lord Orton has suggested has been very, very weak indeed. I hope, my Lords, the government will be as vigorous in dealing with the WHO as they appear to be doing so with the Chinese government.
The Noble Lord raises a very valid point, and I assure him that as the UK's Human Rights Minister, I will raise this issue with all appropriate organisations.
I'm grateful to hear from my noble friend the Minister that we've made bilateral representations and used our seat at the Human Rights Council, but there are other, often more subtle ways we can exert influence. The UK government is actually an employer of many local staff in our embassies, and our soft power institutions such as the British Council and perhaps the BBC also employ a lot of local staff. So could my noble friend the Minister please outline whether the government has a policy in situations like this of ensuring that these persecuted minorities are represented within the local staff that we employ?
My noble friend raises a very important point. I assure her that in terms of recruitment in any post throughout the world, the United Kingdom adopts a policy of equality and justice. I think her point in ensuring that all communities of a particular country are represented and there is no discrimination in our recruitment. She raises an important point about soft power and other organisations working within China, and I will certainly take that back. I don't have the statistics in front of me as to the numbers of different communities employed, but I will certainly take that back and write to her as appropriate.
My Lords, may I declare my interest as a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on the abolition of capital punishments. There is past evidence that a significant proportion of human organs were removed from executed prisoners. China's use of the penalty is subject to great concern because there is no transparency of the number of executions it carries out. We now have an American roving ambassador dealing this particular matter. What liaison exists between our minister and the American roving ambassador to make sure that we bring the strongest possible protest to China about lack of transparency in carrying out such executions?
My Lords, let me assure the Noble Lord I work very closely with Ambassador Sam Brownback on this issue and indeed the issue of freedom of religion across the world. We are coordinated indeed on another recent example was a visit to Pakistan. As I left Islamabad, Ambassador Brownback was arriving, and we've ensured that there's a coordinated approach towards what the United Kingdom is doing and the United States.
Can I just follow up on my noble friend's question in relation to the WHO? I understand and completely agree with the Noble Lord the Minister's commitment to raise these issues with China, but the organ harvesting has other implications, not only with universities that could be cooperating. Can the Noble Lord assure us that he will raise this across Westminster, across Whitehall, and ensure that all departments take this issue seriously and that we don't start using organs harvested from prisoners?
The Noble Lord is quite right, and I'm also aware from the question raised by the previous Noble Lord about the issue of the World Health Organization and their current view, which persists. But let me assure the Noble Lord once again, whether it's the World Health Organization across Whitehall, this is an important issue. There are some countries, for example, that are also adopting systems to put restrictions on this, and we're certainly working with those countries to see how those restrictions are applying, and that we seek to review our own position in that respect.
Lord Watson of Invergowrie.
My Lord, I beg leave to ask the question standing on my name on the order paper.
My Lords, it's for schools to make their own decisions about investing their funding and about staffing. The Department publishes pay ranges and all maintained schools must follow these in setting pay. Whilst there is more money going into our schools than ever before, we recognise some budgeting challenges. That is why we've introduced a wide range of practical support to help schools and local authorities economise on non-staff costs.
My Lord, I thank the Noble Lord the Minister for that reply, but I have to say it's the usual mantra about more funding going into schools, which, quite frankly, is sophistry, because 91% of schools have suffered real terms cuts in per pupil funding since 2015. And my question highlights just one example of the school budgets being stretched beyond breaking point, leading to situations where parents are asked to buy essential items such as books and stationery, and some schools now close on Friday lunchtimes to save money. My Lords, is it not a disgrace that in one of the richest economies in the world, head teachers are forced to beg for funding in some situations? The very principle of free education is being undermined by Conservative cuts to our schools. Now, the government's latest school workforce statistics show that in 2017 there were 137,000 more pupils in England's schools, yet there were 5,400 fewer teachers and 2,800 fewer teaching assistants. How can the Noble Lord the Minister possibly justify that?
My Lords, the school that I think has come to the attention of the Noble Lord is the Fursdown School in Wandsworth. And the challenge that this school faces is that it has declining pupil numbers. They have declined every year for 5 years, which is why they need to keep an eye on their staffing levels. And that is the problem there. It is a well-funded school, receives £4,900 per pupil, which is well above the national average of £4,166. In terms of the bigger point of overall funding, the IFS has said independently that per pupil funding for 5 to 16-year-olds by 2020 will be 50% higher than it was in 2000.
Lord Watson says 91%. It's 91% per pupil that's seen, the 91% of pupil cuts in schools across England. Look, to have staff taking cuts in their salary, to close schools on a Friday, to have your so-called cost cutters go into school and suggest that maybe the lunchtime school portions are reduced in size. That's no way to run an education service. Does the Minister say that there haven't been 91% reduction in funding in our schools? In my home city of Liverpool, it's actually since 2015, we've lost £48 million to our schools.
My Lords, as I answered in the earlier question, funding is going up, and I don't think it helps the debate to follow scurrilous articles that talk about food portions. In that school, they were throwing away a large quantity of food. Now, no parent wants to see that happen. Environmentally, that is a huge waste. It was simply highlighted as an area of inefficiency. We do not, as a schools minister, no one wants more funding into the system than me, but I want the system to be well run so the money goes to the front line. You will have seen the story in the press the other day about, I think it's called the Tolworth Girls' School, where the head teacher claimed that she was so badly funded that she had to clean the lavatories herself. What she didn't tell you was that she took an 8% pay rise, taking her between £125,000 and £130,000, and she increased the cleaning budget by nearly 90%.
The government speaks a lot about the importance of social mobility for pupils. Does he not think that this is an appalling situation for dedicated professionals to be in, taking salary cuts and doing all they have to do to keep the schools running? Is the government speaking to teachers' unions and head teachers' unions about this situation? And if so, what is the response?
My Lords, last year we increased the main scale pay rate for teachers by the largest amount in nearly 10 years. Teachers are well paid and deservedly so. This year we are increasing the contribution to their pensions by some 43%. That is one of the largest increases in any pension contribution in the country.
Well, it's very difficult for those of us who are not experts in this subject to gather from the interchanges that have taken place the actual position about per pupil funding in schools. I'd therefore be very grateful to the Noble Lord the Minister if he could tell me whether the assertions that have been made about per pupil funding in schools are correct or not.
My Lords, the noble lady is right, it is complicated, which is why we introduced the national funding formula, which put another £1.3 billion into the system. Since 2017, we have given every local authority more money for every pupil in every school, while allocating the biggest increases to schools that have historically been the most underfunded. So there are 43 local authorities that in between 2017-18 and 19-20 have seen a 4% or greater increase per pupil.
So what exactly is the change in per pupil funding?
Because we've inherited a very, very fragile... The average per pupil funding was, as I gave in an earlier question, around £4,100 per pupil. On top of that, you add pupil premium, which is some £12 billion that we've put into the system for the most disadvantaged children, as raised by the noble Baroness earlier. The funding is good, but I would like to see more, but I want to see it going to the front line where children will benefit.